Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the Haunted Woods for a chilling collection of scary stories. Don't forget that you can grab 70% off my Patreon and get access to loads of cool exclusive content by following the link down below and punching in code GHOST. Valid until the 15th of December. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I wanted to share this story that was told to me long ago by a friend. It was one of those stories that sticks with you for years, settling into the back of your mind until you find the perfect quiet night to replay it. I've heard many strange accounts over the years, some told to me by co-workers, some by family, and some I've even lived through myself. A few shocking, others baffling, but none of them left me with that same uneasy feeling and that the world is bigger and stranger than we think than this one. So here you have it. This is Cujo's story. Cujo was an old co-worker of mine back when I worked construction in northern New Mexico, right on the reservation. He was a quiet guy and didn't say much unless he had something worth saying. He was Navajo, and one day we were on break, and he shared an encounter he'd had near his home, somewhere out in that long stretch of land between New Mexico and Arizona, where the desert seems to swallow everything that enters it. The story began after one of his roughest work days. Cujo had finished a back-breaking 12-hour shift. When he got home, he and his wife started arguing. Frustrated and needing space, he grabbed a pack of beer, got in his truck, and began driving the reservation roads to cool off. He told me the night was pitch black, the kind of darkness you can only get in the desert, with some stars shining up top. Eventually, he came across a narrow dirt road, winding up towards what he thought was a mountain or maybe the edge of a basin. The path was so steep and tight that halfway up, he wondered how he'd even made it as far as he had without rolling off the side. He knew getting down would be worse, but he was stubborn and upset, so he kept going until he reached the top. He parked and sat on the tailgate, drinking and letting the cool desert wind settle his nerves. After about half an hour, he began hearing strange noises carried through the still air, sounds he couldn't place. Cujo knew the noises of the land well. He'd grown up around coyotes, dogs, mountain animals, even the odd wildcat. But these sounds didn't match anything he recognized. They were distant at first, so faint he thought maybe he imagined them. But then, after his second or third beer, the noises came again, closer this time, sharper, something between a cry and a scream. He said that second sound shot ice straight down his spine. Uneasily, he climbed back into his truck, locked the doors, and decided to finish the rest of his beer inside while listening to music. It didn't help. A few minutes later, the noises rose again, louder and more frantic, echoing across the desert like something was hurt or hunting or angry. He couldn't tell. That was the moment fear really settled in. He threw the beers aside, started the truck, and tore back down the dirt road. In the darkness, with no real sense of the land around him, he wasn't sure where he was heading. He just knew he had to get away from the mountain. He found another turn-off and followed it, just hoping it would take him somewhere safer. But the screams didn't stop. He said they followed him, always behind him, sometimes off to the side but never far away. Then, without warning, his headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. An elderly Navajo man holding a shotgun. Cujo slammed on the brakes. He told me, in that moment, what would you do? Keep driving into the dark with those screams getting closer, or stop for the man pointing a shotgun at you? The man motioned for him to get out of the truck and demanded he follow him to a nearby house. Cujo went, gun or no gun. The desert behind him felt more dangerous. Inside the small home he was stunned. An elderly woman and 3 children, all of them clutching rifles. None of the kids looked older than 12. The elderly man asked Cujo if he'd heard the noises, and when Cujo nodded, he told him he needed to stay for the night because it wasn't safe out there alone. Cujo said he had never seen these people before in his life. He had no idea anyone even lived out that far, but the fear on their faces matched his own. None of them slept that night. The noises continued circling the house, scraping along the outer walls, sometimes breaking into shrill screams that carried through the thin desert air. He heard footsteps, heavy ones, pacing around the home over and over, until the faint light of dawn appeared. Only then did everything stop. Cujo thanked the family, shook their hands, and left as soon as the sun came up. He said they were some of the kindest people he'd ever met, and that kindness probably saved his life that night. After then, he swore he would never again wander the reservation at night, especially not unarmed. He'd grown up hearing stories about skinwalkers and Bigfoot-like creatures, but he'd always dismissed them as traditions, warnings, old tales to keep people cautious. But after that night, he told me he believes it. All of it. I was 18 when he told me this story. I'm 30 now, and I worked with Cujo for 3 years before I left for the military. I haven't talked to him since, but I remember the way he told it, the serious tone in his voice, the way he stared off towards the desert while speaking like he was replaying the whole thing in his head. I believe him. And I believe the other stories I've heard from people who live out there, stories from men and women who have no reason to exaggerate anything. Out there, the desert holds its secrets, and sometimes if you're unlucky, you get to find out what exactly they are. If you've ever spent any time hunting up in northern Michigan, you've probably heard whispers about it. Everyone's got their own name for the thing that stalks those woods. Some people call it the Watcher, others call it the Tall One. Older people might say, you know what I'm talking about. My granddad had a different name for it. He called it the one you don't shoot. I grew up hearing that phrase from him, always said in the same tone, and not joking either, just matter of fact. He used to tell me about the first time he saw the thing, sometimes in the late 70s, near Torch Lake. According to him, it was one of those eerily perfect mornings for hunting. He climbed into his blind long before first light, and sat there listening to the quiet, watching the world turn from black to grey. And that's when the buck stepped out. He told me he'd never seen anything like it before or since. The size of it didn't seem natural. Massive body, wide chest, and antlers, so broad and heavy they looked almost ceremonial, like something carved for a king in a storybook. Granddad raised his rifle, steady and sure, finger curling around the trigger. And then he saw its eyes. He swore to me they weren't deer eyes, not the dull, wary look you see in most bucks. They were focused and intelligent. They had the weight of age in them, like there was someone else looking back at him. And before he could pull the trigger, he heard it. Not in the air, nor with his ears. It was a voice in his head, clear and steady as his own thoughts. Not me. Granddad froze. His fingers went numb. His pulse spiked so hard he could hear it in his teeth. The buck didn't move or twitch, just stared at him, like it was waiting to see what he'd do. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it turned away and walked back into the trees, calm and unhurried, like it knew he wouldn't dare follow, even if he wanted to. He told me he stayed in that stand for a full 10 minutes, before he trusted his legs enough to climb down, and when he finally went back to his truck, that's when he noticed the dirt around it. Hoof prints, fresh ones, circling the truck in tight loops, crossing over themselves again and again, like something had been pacing and waiting for him to return. After that, he said he understood why the old hunters keep the same rule. Don't shoot it. Don't even lift your rifle. Plenty of men up north have their own stories if you ask them. Stories that they probably don't share easily. Some say it's a spirit. Others say it's something else. Others say that if you shoot, you'll never leave those woods. I laughed about it for most of my life. Just another campfire myth, another way the old folks keep kids out of the deep timber. Then last season happened. I was out near Robinson Road, right in the same stretch of woods my granddad used to hunt. That morning was dead quiet, thick frost on the ground. And that's when I saw something move in a clearing. A buck, massive, broadside, picture-perfect shot. I raised my rifle. Through the scope, I watched it lift its head, and for just a heartbeat, its mouth seemed to pull back into a sharp no, and for a fraction of a second, its mouth seemed to pull back into a shape that no deer's face should ever make. A smile, the kind a human would make. My stomach dropped straight into my boots. I lowered the rifle without thinking, and just sat there breathing like I'd run a mile uphill. And then I felt a cold pressure in the center of my skull. A thought that wasn't mine, pushing its way into my mind. Good. And I haven't laughed at the story since. This story takes place in November of 2022. At the time, I drew a special elk tag in the Beaverhead mountain range of central East Idaho. I had hunted in this area many times before over the years, and I knew the area like the back of my hand. It became a place of comfort and good memories. It still is, but I haven't looked at it the same way since the story I'm about to tell you. I planned a week-long trip for the first week of November and took one of my best friends with me. We spent the first 4 days hiking up and down various ridges, chasing elk and having a blast. The nights were spent storytelling and eating soup by the stove. Mind you, it was November in Idaho, so it was very cold. It was the 4th night of the trip. It had snowed during the day, and a fresh layer of snow was on the ground. The sky had since cleared up, and a very cold but still quiet air had settled in. My friend and I had gotten into a deep discussion about the Bible, spirits, and cryptids. I should note that my friend at the time had been experiencing a decline in his mental health, and it was not uncommon for him sometimes to behave erratically. This will be relevant later in the story. During this conversation, I felt an intense fear settle onto me. It almost felt like the air had become tense. I had the urge to change the discussion into something else. But that's when it happened. Within 20 to 30 yards of the tent, what I thought at first was a coyote began yipping and barking very, very loudly. I looked at my friend, who became excited and told me to grab my gun so we could go for this thing. It was strange though, and something didn't feel right. The animal, whatever it was, didn't exactly sound like a coyote. It almost shrieked as opposed to yipping the way coyotes do, and it would occasionally bark, and at times almost scream. I'm an experienced outdoorsman, and any other hunter knows a coyote would not approach a tent in the middle of nowhere and draw attention to itself. It would continue to vocalize for about 3 to 5 minutes at a time, circling the tent from a distance. I reluctantly grabbed my rifle and my spotlight, very bright intense flashlight, and started looking for this thing. As I stepped about 10 yards away from the tent, I heard it again directly in front of me, shrieking and barking. I shined my light directly at it. I could see probably 150 to 200 yards in front of me, yet nothing was there. No eye shining in the light, no outline of an animal or person. Nothing. After repeating this same scenario 3 or 4 times, we gave up and went back into the tent to warm up, but the sound wouldn't stop. At one point, when it went silent, my friend poked his head out the tent and yelled, "Hey, shut up!" He was immediately answered by a scream from the animal. At times it sounded like it came from above the tent in the tree that we were camped under. I tried playing it off as a coyote or maybe a hunting dog that got lost, but I couldn't convince myself it was either of those, and we ignored it for the rest of the time. It slowly started going further and further away from the tent, until it finally stopped, about an hour or so later. The next morning I looked around the area for tracks, yet to my surprise I found nothing but our own. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the trip, and a few days later we went home. I don't know if this is at all related, but about 3 months after this, my friend had a complete mental breakdown, and has since never been on a hunting trip. Some of his family, a deeply religious one, questioned whether he was a victim of some kind of spiritual attack or something of that nature. I didn't correlate the two at the time, but in hindsight I have so many questions about that night. Is it a coincidence that whatever animal was appearing during that particular conversation could have actually been a coyote or wolf? Why couldn't I see its eyes gleaming with the flashlight? Did this incident have something to do with my friend's mental decline? My friend would sometimes tell me and others about strange things he saw or heard. Was this related? If anyone has anything to point out, I'd appreciate it if you shared it with me. My boyfriend and I have had some genuinely creepy, surreal, and just outright bizarre experiences while living in Washington State, and I wanted to finally share them in one place. We are originally from New Mexico, so when the pandemic hit, and we were both suddenly out of work, we used the free time to explore as much of the Pacific Northwest as we could. The landscapes up here are stunning, but something about the forests, especially in certain pockets of the Olympic Peninsula, feel always comforting. Everything really started around 2020, when we spent a lot of time wandering the western and southern edges of the peninsula. One day, we stopped in Port Angeles, did some research, and eventually made our way down to Quilayute. Rosario Beach was absolutely breathtaking. Before continuing south to the Quinault Reservation, my boyfriend is Quinault Cowlitz, we pulled off onto a quiet road and made a couple of sandwiches. The woods around us were impossibly lush and moss-covered. That deep green that only seems to exist in Washington. Even though the sun was fading fast, we decided to stretch our legs and take a short walk under the canopy. But the deeper we went, the worse we felt. It wasn't the normal forest quiet. It was silent. The temperature dropped in a way that didn't feel normal either. Not a regular cooling down of the evening, but a sharp drop in temperature that was noticeable. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was overthinking it. Then the ground gave way under my boyfriend's leg. We didn't realize what we were walking into until his entire thigh sank straight down into the earth. I grabbed him and pulled as hard as I could, and the moment he got free, the ground where he'd been standing collapsed further, widening into a dark pit that went straight down. The forest floor there was so thick with old leaves, bark and moss that it formed a fragile crust over hollow spaces we had no idea were beneath us. That's when the unease turned into actual fear. We immediately started trying to retrace our steps, but the path back didn't make sense. We'd only walked maybe 100 to 200 meters from the car. Nothing that should have been disorienting, but suddenly nothing looked familiar. Worse, we couldn't get any service under the thick canopy, so Google Maps wouldn't load. Everything around us felt slightly wrong. Then came the rustling. At first, I thought it was just animals, but the bushes around us were stirring in multiple places, moving with purpose. I whispered to my boyfriend, "Are you hearing that?" And he nodded. Every time I lifted my eyes from the ground, I saw something white move just outside the reach of our headlamp, pale, hazy shape slipping between tree trunks and brush. I tried convincing myself that it was the darkness playing tricks on me, but the dread wouldn't go away. We kept moving until my boyfriend spotted a faint clearing ahead of us and led us towards it. We started out into what looked like a work site. Heavy machinery dug up soil, floodlights off for the night, It didn't make sense how we'd ended up there. From that clearing, we could see the paved road, so we hurried to the car. When we finally got reception again, I checked the map. Somehow we had wandered a full kilometer away, farther than we could have walked without crossing at least one dirt logging road, but we never saw a single one. The next morning, after I'd had time to stop shaking, I asked my boyfriend what exactly he'd seen. He told me he hadn't wanted to scare me more, but he'd been watching multiple figures, 2 or 3 pale humanoid silhouettes moving from tree to tree the entire time we were trying to get back. He also heard a strange vocalization, a rapid, high-pitched "ay ay ay," almost human but not quite, feminine but wrong. I hadn't heard it over my own panicked breathing, but just listening to him imitate it made the hair on my arm stand on end. I've never felt so vulnerable in nature. I always feel safe with him. 10 years together will do that, but there's no protection against something you can't understand. And to this day I've never gotten straight answers about sinkholes, like that being common in some forests, and it still bothers me. A few months later we were driving off Highway 2, somewhere between Sultan and Gold Bar, when just off the side of the road was a pile of hog parts, head, legs, entrails, skin just dumped there. We turned around to look, thinking maybe it was from hunters, but it was too precise to be roadkill and too close to houses to be normal. Whoever left it there had butchered the animal and discarded the scraps in a neat heap. The whole thing felt wrong, ritualistic even. Another night we were driving Highway 530 between Mansford and Rockport at 1 a.m. when my boyfriend pulled over for cold medicine from the trunk. I stepped out for air, and the moment my feet hit the ground, I felt an overwhelming sense that we were being watched from above. Then I smelt this sharp, thick, dehydrated urine smell that wasn't quite animal but not entirely human either, and it reminded me of something sick. I said, "I smell urine, we need to go." And without saying a word, my boyfriend jumped back into the car. Later, when I told someone about it, they mentioned Sasquatch encounters often come with strong urine or skunk-like odors. I don't know if that's what it was, but there was definitely something up on the hillside watching us, and whatever it was didn't want us there. But the encounter that has stuck with me the most happened when we were driving from Laborie State Park along Chuckanut Drive into the farmlands at night. It's a gorgeous route during the day, but at night it gets eerily dark. Without warning, a translucent human figure appeared directly in the middle of the road. There was no time to brake, we drove straight through it, and I watched it move smoothly from being outside the car to being partially inside the cab, like light passing through water. It looked male with a low-profile baseball cap and a yellow-orange windbreaker. I still wondered if he was hit by a car in the exact spot. The encounter was so quick and clear I can't explain it as anything but a ghost. There are more things we experienced, lot more. But these are the ones that replay in my head at night. Washington is beautiful, but some parts of it feel creepy. I'm fascinated by the supernatural, and if anyone has any explanation for any of these experiences, I'd love to get your take on them. The property I live on has been in my dad's family for generations, deep in the countryside, surrounded by woods that stretch for nearly 2 kilometers behind the house. The manor we live in now is old, but not the original. The original house burnt down about a century ago. Family history says a woman on horseback robbed the place of its silver and set it on fire for good measure, then vanished into the trees. We even found an old book behind the pantry during renovations that detailed the property's history, but it has since vanished. Despite all that, this has always been a great place to grow up. It's peaceful and spacious, or at least it was, until about 2 years ago. My bandmates were staying over before a gig nearby. Usually we all just crash in the basement, which is basically our off-brand living room. But I was exhausted from a rough night before and decided to sleep upstairs in my own room. We all turned in at around 2:30 a.m. I was seconds from falling asleep when a sound right outside jolted me awake. My window was open because it was summer, and what I heard wasn't anything I had a name for. A scream. It wasn't human, not in a normal sense. It was guttural, gritty, and painfully loud, drawn out in 4 or 5 second bursts. Between each scream came this rasping, exhausted breath, like whatever it was had been screaming for hours, but it started out of nowhere, right in front of my house. At first, I thought it was a severely injured man. That's how desperate it sounded. But the longer I listened, the less human it seemed. The breaking point was the sound of it running. I know animals can mimic human screams, and I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't hear it clearly on the gravel. 2 feet, not 4, and it moved fast and humanly fast. It kept circling the yard, darting back and forth in bursts, and every step was unmistakably bipedal. I froze. I'm not easily scared, but this was something else entirely. I had the overwhelming sense that if I so much as touched the blinds and it caught me watching, something awful would happen. So I sat there stiff as a board for what felt like hours. Eventually, the thing sprinted off, still screaming. That's when I realized just how fast it really was. When the screams finally faded, I tried to record the last of it on my phone. The audio is barely usable. I had to compress it just to hear the faintest trace. Part of me was hoping it would come back so I could capture more, but it never did. I ran downstairs to the basement. My friends were still awake watching some trash movie. They could see I was shaken. "You guys heard that, right?" "Heard what?" "The screaming." But with the TV volume high and their windows closed, nothing had filtered down. They listened to me describe it and acted sympathetic, but I could tell they thought I was overtired and probably imagined it. By then the panic was fading, and then I went back upstairs and immediately passed out. For months after, I avoided the wood unless I absolutely had to go through them, which was difficult since every path to the house cuts through forest. One autumn hit, and it started getting dark earlier. I even turned off the back light when biking home so I wouldn't stand out as a moving target. And nothing happened for a while. Then a few months ago, my dog started acting strange. At night, I'd go downstairs for a drink and find her sitting in the big interior doorway, staring into the dark expanse of the house. She wouldn't respond when I called her name, eyes fixed, body tense. It unsettled me, but I brushed it off, until the night I found her at the front door, rigid and focused. I figured she needed to go out, so I opened the door a little, and she bolted, sprinting straight into the woods. I grabbed a flashlight and followed, calling her name. When I was about 50 meters from the house, I heard rustling from nearby, and I stopped, thinking it was her. Then it screamed. The scream from that night. Birds exploded out of the trees in all directions. A few seconds later, my dog came tearing out of the woods from the exact direction of the sound. We both sprinted back across the open yard. I have never felt so exposed, and slammed into the house. I locked the door. The screaming continued faintly for a while before fading again, and I barely slept. Months passed without incident, and for a while I let myself believe it was over, until a few days ago. I was laying in bed just trying to sleep, when I heard knocking on the exterior walls, just a few sharp raps, but it was unmistakable. The same thing has happened every night since, but last night it escalated. Something tapped on my bedroom window, my second floor window. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? I just lay there, barely breathing, hoping it wouldn't try again. I'm not asking anyone to believe me blindly, but I'm hoping someone has an explanation. I've ruled out foxes as they're common here in Sweden, but their screams are nothing like this. Lynxes and boars exist, but they don't behave like this, and sightings are extremely rare around these woods. After talking to my grandfather, I learned something else. 7 people have died in these woods over the last 25 years. No predators or cliffs or dangerous terrain, just vanished or found dead, with no clear cause. I'm trying to stay skeptical and rational, but I don't know what the hell was happening here. Any advice would be appreciated. I remember feeling uneasy from the very start of that trip, even though by then, camping with my best friend Josh had become our routine escape. Every month, we picked a weekend, chose a new spot somewhere in the Washington forest, and disappeared for a few days to hunt, fish, or just get away from everything. This time, we'd rented a small cabin tucked in a very scenic valley near the base of Mount Rainier. The place sat on a ridge just above the river, perfect for the gold panning trip we'd been planning. I had my Jeep packed, full of gear. His dad even got us permission from the owner so we could keep whatever we found. Before I left home, my wife Caitlin stuffed sandwiches in my backpack and asked if I had my GPS. I kissed her, brushed a strand from her face and said, "Relax, I promise, no repeat of last fall," where Josh and I had gotten badly turned around in the woods the year before. Long story short, good GPS units are worth every penny. Josh and I had known each other basically our entire lives, next-door neighbors with similar hobbies, anime, video games, and the outdoors. He was the guy who kept me laughing while I was stuck in the hospital as a kid, and he was standing beside me as my best man at my wedding. I used to have a picture of us from that night, but it burnt in a house fire last year. Only my face remained, his charred away. I kissed Caitlin goodbye, and I was off. I picked him up, and we were on our way. The drive to the cabin was easy. We each called home to check in, then headed down to the river. I set up the box in a shallow area while Josh dug buckets of dirt to pan through, and after a few hours, we actually found some small flecks of gold. Nothing life-changing, but we felt proud all the same. Later, back inside, Josh showed me a small figurine he'd found while digging, something ugly and knotted, like a stick doll straight out of the Blair Witch Project. I told him it had bad juju and he should ditch it. He shrugged and tossed it into the firewood pile. That night, sitting by the campfire, the uneasy feeling returned strong. The forest seemed different. Even the weed wouldn't calm my nerves. The trees felt twisted, shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. Josh was roasting a hot dog when we heard it, a long, low howl echoing through the valley. Every hair on my body stood on end. Wolves are rare in that part of Washington, and at that moment I realized all the normal night sounds had stopped. There were no frogs or crickets. It was silent. I dropped the joint and squinted into the darkness beyond the firelight. Low, hunched shapes seemed to be creeping between the trees, just vague silhouettes, but enough to send my heart into my throat. Josh and I started backing towards the cabin together, both of us watching the tree line. The shapes shifted just out of our vision, sliding between shadows, and then without a word we broke into a sprint. We slammed the cabin door shut, shoved the locks in place and stood there panting, gesturing for each other to stay quiet. Outside we heard movement circling the campsite, heavy sniffling, something rifling through a bag. Then a hollow knocking sound, like wood striking against the door. A low guttural growl and then silence. I forced myself to glance at the window, lit faintly by the fire still crackling outside. Nothing stared back at me, no creature or shadow, and for a second I thought we were safe, until I heard laughter. It sounded like that of a child. It sounded like Josh's daughter, Samantha. Josh's eyes went wide in pure panic. Before I could grab him, he yanked the door open and sprinted into the woods, screaming Sam. I ran after him, but no matter how fast I moved, he kept getting further ahead, swallowed by the darkness, until he was gone. The laughter followed me, distant, playful, taunting, and then it stopped. And all the normal forest sounds returned, crickets chirping, and owls hooting somewhere far off in the distance. I spent 2 hours searching and shouting for Josh, but I couldn't find anything. There were no tracks, no broken branches, just empty woods. When I finally collapsed into bed, I barely slept. In the morning, all our gear was still there, but Josh was gone. He hadn't returned yet. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. The dread hit me hard. I needed help. I called my wife to tell her what happened, and she interrupted me almost immediately. "Who's Josh?" "What do you mean, who's Josh? He's my best mate. I've known him for—" "You don't have a friend called Josh," she said gently. "Are you okay? Why don't you just come home?" Confused and shaking, I hung up and decided to call Josh's wife Cassandra, expecting Samantha to answer like she always did. Instead, Cassandra picked up, her voice exhausted and weary. "Cass," I said, relieved. "Listen, last night Josh heard something in the wood. He said it sounded like Sam and ran off, and now I can't find him." There was a pause. "Who's Sam?" she asked. "Who's Josh? Who the hell are you? How did you get this number?" The call spiraled from there. She hung up, and I stood in the quiet cabin realizing nothing made sense. No one remembered them, not my wife, not his wife, not even Josh's parents. They remembered me, but said they had no son. It's been months since that night, and the world has moved on like Josh and Samantha never existed, like they were erased, wiped clean from the memories of everyone but me. I don't know what I encountered in those woods that night. I don't know why it took them and it let me go. But a few minutes ago I opened the back of my Jeep to grab something and found 2 small brown paper bags sitting on the seat, each one filled with chocolate chip cookies. The ones that Samantha had given us just before we left. If Josh and Samantha were never real, where did the cookies come from? Wherever you are, Josh and Sam, I hope that you're okay. Yosemite Valley, August 22nd, 1989. It happened the next night after we got married, in the Valley Chapel on the 21st. It was about midnight when we decided to go swimming in the Merced River off the North Side Drive just east of Pohono Bridge. We stopped the car and parked to walk down the river. There were no other cars in sight, or had been since we left the valley areas. We assumed we would be alone there. Now, as a side note, there are no time restrictions on visitors to the park, so you can be active 24 hours a day. Some people like to deer watch at night with no lights, and are sometimes described as looking like zombies wandering the meadows. Although we were approximately 6 miles from the campground, it's not unthinkable that people may have walked there at night. So to continue, we got out of the car, grabbed flashlights, towels and a blanket, and proceeded down the dirt trail which goes to the river's edge, where there's a sandy area and you can swim there. I had been going to these places with my family throughout my life, and I was very familiar with the layout and situation. I had not been there at midnight. From the car to the sand was maybe 30 yards through a wooded slope. We were partway down when I saw 2 men standing off the trail to my left, and I shined my light on them, as I did not know what they were looking at in the dark. When I saw it was people, I quickly shined the light down and apologized to them, but they didn't move or say anything. So I thought, okay, I guess they're into the deer watching thing and trying to be quiet. At least now I knew we were not alone. Another side note, all my life camping when coming across strangers day or night, there's usually some sign of recognition or brief greeting as courtesy. A head nod or a small, "How's it going?" is typical. But with these guys, there was nothing. As I said, they didn't make a sound or move. They were tall and standing erect and side by side, and appeared to be wearing formal attire. This was apparent as I shined the light on them, and also in their silhouettes. Liz didn't see them, as she was moving forwards towards the beach. When I got there behind her, she was spreading out the blanket and had sat down. I joined her. The river was there and was making noise, and the moonlight was coming through the trees. From the left, out of the trees, a couple emerged. They were dressed in wedding clothes like a bride and groom. They came out, stood at the river's edge about 10 yards from us, and I could hear them talking softly, but the river noise made it hard to make out what exactly they were saying. The moonlight shone on them, and after a few moments they turned more towards us, and appeared to be looking our way, or maybe watching us. To me, they seemed to be talking about us, but maybe I was being paranoid. I am becoming nervous, as I do not quite understand the situation that is taking place. I look behind us and can see the two black figures not far behind us near the trail. As I look back around us, I now see a figure come out of the woods on the right and walk out onto a rock that jutted into the river. He was acting or moving like an ape-man, slumped over and waving his arms and crouching down menacingly. Very odd, I thought to myself. Why is he doing that? Where did all these people come from? At this point I was getting agitated and nervous, as I was feeling surrounded. But Liz seemed not bothered by it, although she admitted our swim was probably off. As we settled in, I noticed a group of people standing nearby, a man, a woman, and two large figures beside them. They weren't doing anything, just silently watching us from the dark, and I assumed we'd accidentally intruded on people who were already there, so we tried to ignore it. A few minutes later, Liz realized she'd left her cigarettes in the car and asked if I'd be so kind to grab them. I didn't want to go back alone. I already felt unsettled. Something about the stillness of those people made me feel vulnerable. Liz thought I was acting strange, so I forced myself to get up, irritated at myself for being afraid. I walked right past the group to the car, grabbed the cigarettes, and while I was there, I opened the trunk and retrieved a sword I kept stored inside. I slammed the trunk shut louder than necessary, hoping the noise would communicate that I was willing to defend myself if need be. When I returned, I planted the sword in the ground next to where we were sitting. Liz stared at me concerned, asking what I was doing. I blurted out louder than I meant to. When people sneak up on you and won't speak in a strange place at night, I want them to know I'm ready to defend myself. I don't even know why I said it in that way. I was afraid, but I didn't like the way it came out. Later, Liz told me she was concerned she had just got married to a crazy person. We sat there for a few more minutes before deciding to leave. The figures didn't react as we packed up, and we got back in the car without incident. We drove deeper into the valley, down El Portal Road, towards Cascades picnic area, a place I used to visit as a kid. It was much further from the bridge and campground, so I expected it to be empty at that hour. But as we pulled into the parking area, our headlights illuminated another group of people sitting at a picnic table in the dark. We decided to head to the river anyway, keeping to ourselves. I left the sword in the car this time. We walked the short trail about 100 yards through the moonlit woods. The trail was clear and easy to follow, and that's when I saw her. A woman stood beside the path ahead of us. She was maybe 40 yards away, wearing a long, white, intricate gown of pearls, lace, and a veil. The whole thing looked old-fashioned and strangely formal. As we walked closer, her features came into focus. Pale, glowing white-blue skin and an unnaturally serene smile. My tension rose the closer we got, but Liz didn't seem worried, so I stayed quiet. When we finally walked right beside her, I forced myself to look her in the eye and say hello. She just kept smiling. A few steps later, Liz suddenly asked, "Why did you say hello to a tree?" I turned back and nearly jumped out my skin. It was a stump, just a tree stump catching the moonlight. But I swear, I thought I knew what I saw. The dress, the veil, the face, it had all been so clear. Still, seeing the stump left me confused and embarrassed. Not long after, I noticed a dark shape standing off the trail on either side. Human-sized fingers. I didn't shine my flashlight on them, and I asked Liz if she saw them, but she did not. She asked why I kept seeing things. I started feeling defensive. I was so certain they were there. In my mind, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe I was in some heightened state of awareness, seeing things most people normally couldn't. I told myself I needed to be careful, not panicked. We reached the ridge overlooking the river. 15 feet below, near a fallen tree in the water, I saw 2 more figures, bulky, bipedal, facing the river as if fishing. One had a small red glow near its face like a cigarette. I told Liz I saw people down there and she was irritated now, insisting she saw nothing. Fear spiked through me and I snapped, "Oh yeah? Then what's that?" I aimed my flashlight at them. Both figures jerked around instantly and they stared up at us. The movement was wrong. The shapes were wrong. They were huge black silhouettes, with aggression in the way that turned to make my body react before my mind caught up. Liz gripped me and shouted, "Let's go." Later she told me that when one of them turned towards her, its head twisted like a snake, totally unnaturally, and that whatever they weren't human. We started back towards the car at a fast walk, not running, and I told Liz not to run, that it would trigger a chase. We still had to pass the place where I'd seen the shadow figures, and it felt like the longest 100 yards of my life. When we reached the lot, the picnic table was empty, and not even in the same place we'd seen it before. We climbed into the car and drove off fast. Only then did Liz admit, until the river, she thought I was just freaking myself out. But the way that those things moved convinced her that something was wrong. We drove down towards Tuolumne Meadows, talking through everything, confirming what each of us had seen. The bride and groom, the 2 shadowy men, the animal guy, with red light on his face, and the figures by the river. For the next 30 minutes we drove and pulled into a checkpoint that overlooked the valley. As soon as the headlights swept across the parking area, we saw them all. The bride, groom, 2 shadowy men and the animal guy standing together facing our direction, like they'd been waiting for us. We shouted at the same time, both seeing them clearly, and I reversed out without stopping the engine and kept driving. How the hell had they gotten there? Another 45 minutes passed, still no other cars or people. We eventually passed a ranger cabin with a lit porch, and they were there again. We kept on driving. By the time we reached Lake Tenaya, everything felt surreal. We parked to rest. The moon lit the entire area, and across the highway was a rocky incline from a road cut, steep and not a place where anyone would stand. But as we watched, a dark figure climbed partway down and sat against the rocks facing us, and the fear came back, and we drove on. Near the Tuolumne Meadow camp store, we finally found people, real people, backpackers sitting against the wall waiting for the store to open. The relief was overwhelming. That ended the encounter from the first day of our honeymoon. Nothing physically harmed us or touched us, but they revealed themselves again and again across miles of road with no explanation. Over the decades, I've heard suggestions of ghosts, residual hauntings, fae, witches, skinwalkers, aliens, take your pick. But nothing really fits what it was. Maybe I provoked them with the sword. Or maybe they were just something else entirely. That experience has stayed with me my whole life. What do you think it could have been? For as long as I can remember, going outside my own house has never felt right. Even as a little kid, the moment the sun went down, something in the air around our property made my skin crawl. I could play outside a family member's home, except for one particular grandma's place, or run with friends, even camp deep in the woods without a flashlight and feel totally fine. But at my house, never. And it wasn't just me. Whenever friends came over, none of them would stay outside after dark, not even under the big floodlights in the yard. If they tried, it never lasted more than 20 minutes before they all suddenly wanted to go back in. There was one night during a big game of hide and seek where everything changed. My brother and I agreed afterwards that no one leaves the lit part of the yard again. It felt like something was hunting us. One friend came running to the house crying, swearing that a huge dog had been following right behind her. The creepy part? We did have a big protective dog, and she was lying in the grass 10 feet away dead asleep. Whatever my friend saw wasn't ours. Even before the incident, I'd had horrible nightmares centered around our land. Not about monsters or strangers, specifically the property itself. The one that still haunts me happened when I was about 5. In the dream, I was walking back to the woods with my dad when we came to a creek, except it wasn't water. It was rotting guts and blood, an entire creek full of it. There's no way I would have seen anything in real life that would have put that image in a 5-year-old's mind. And the land doesn't help ease the fear. Around a corner of our wood, there's a corner of our wood that every few months or so smells exactly like rotting flesh. For a day or two, then disappears again. There are never any carcasses or anything dead, but the smell. Being near the tree line without a vehicle makes me physically sick. When I was younger, I drove loops around the yard in a little go-kart and I would floor it through that one stretch because slowing down even for a second would make me panic. I didn't step into the woods alone until I was 14 or 15, and that was only to grab a piece I broke off my truck. Meanwhile, at my grandma's, I wandered the woods alone for hours. Her land felt safe, in a way ours never had. As me and my friends grew older and some of us became more spiritual, we all agreed that there was something off with the land. These are the same people who camp in the middle of nowhere for fun, who hike at night and who don't scare easy. Yet at my house they refuse to leave their car while I run inside to get a charger because the bright light takes too long to come on. They won't even pee outside when we camp in the backyard. They make me drive them to the house instead. Inside, the house has always had its own problems too. For years I'd hear my name being called, mostly from the basement, but honestly, all over. I'd be alone, there'd be absolutely no one home, and I'd hear someone say my name clear as day. And when my dad was gone, I would hear what sounded exactly like him starting laundry downstairs, even though the house was empty. Growing up, the feeling of being watched outside was constant. The hair-raising, prickling someone standing right behind you kind of feeling. Eventually, I forced myself to live with it because I was tired of hiding in the bathroom to change clothes as a 6 to 8-year-old who felt like something outdoors was staring straight through the walls. And all of this brings me to tonight. I'm out back tent camping with a friend. I'm a little drunk. She's getting nervous, and she keeps begging me to go back inside because the tension is so thick you can practically taste it. I still believe we're safe, but something is definitely up with this land. Maybe it's cursed. If anyone has an explanation or advice for how to deal with whatever this is, I'm open to it, because whatever's out here has been watching me my whole life. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories. I will be back again tomorrow with some camping stories, so I hope to see you there. And if you are a member or patron, you'll be getting some babysitter stories as well, too, as an extra bonus. And again, if you'd like to join me over on Patreon for some cool exclusive content, you can follow the link in the description to get 70% off punching in code GHOST until the 16th of December. I'd like to give one final thank you to, of course, my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support and generosity. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.